My name is Sophia Baker, and this is how one Thanksgiving toast from my father changed everything. It was Thanksgiving night in Cleveland, Ohio. The room glowed. The roast was flawless, and my father stood at the head of the table, glass raised high. Then he said the words that changed everything. To children who bring pride to their families, he declared, his voice carrying that familiar weight of authority, and to others who are still trying to find their way. My sister stood up clapping. Someone at the table yelled, "Woohoo!" I didn't move. I didn't shrink. I just smiled and said, "Good thing I just won the National Urban Design Award in Seattle for my urban housing project." I looked at him. "Don't worry, Dad. I found my way, and the world has already noticed." The silence that followed was deafening, and for the first time ever, my father lost his voice. Have you ever been dismissed by the people who are supposed to celebrate you? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know I'm not alone. I grew up in a modest neighborhood on the east side of Cleveland, where lawns were carefully maintained and everyone knew everyone else's business. Our house was a two-story colonial with blue shutters, the kind of place that smelled like coffee in the morning and pot roast on Sundays. My father worked in corporate law, my mother taught elementary school, and my older sister Hannah was everything they'd hoped for: organized, practical, destined for stability. And then there was me. From the time I was 7 years old, I was the child who preferred dirt under her fingernails to dolls and cribs. While Hannah practiced piano scales in the living room, I was in the backyard, sketching garden designs on old cardboard, arranging stones into pathways, planting seeds I'd collected from the park. "Sophia's playing in the dirt again," my mother would say with that particular sigh, not cruel, just resigned, as if my interests were a phase she was waiting for me to outgrow. My father's response was always the same. "She needs to focus on something practical." I remember the summer I was 12. I'd spent weeks transforming a neglected corner of our backyard into a small garden, wildflowers, a stone border, a bench I'd convinced my father to help me build. I was so proud. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see what I saw: beauty created from nothing, space transformed into something alive. My father walked past it twice that day and said nothing. When I finally asked him what he thought, he glanced at it briefly and said, "It's nice, honey. But don't let this distract you from your studies. You'll need good grades if you want a real career someday." A real career. Those words echoed through every year that followed. In high school, when I talked about studying landscape architecture or urban design, my father steered every conversation toward law, medicine, business, fields with respectable futures and steady paychecks. "Landscaping isn't a real career, Sophia," he told me more than once. "It's something you hire people to do, not something you become." My mother never disagreed with him. Not out loud. She'd just offer a soft smile and change the subject, her silence a kind of agreement by omission. So I compromised. I went to college for environmental science, close enough to my passion to keep me interested, practical enough to keep them from worrying. After graduation, I took a job with a landscape firm in Akron, just 40 minutes from home. I told myself I was being smart, staying close, being the good daughter. But the criticism followed me anyway. "You're wasting your degree," my father said when I told him about my first project, a community park redesign. "You could be doing something that actually matters." I stopped sharing my work with him after that. The decision to leave came slowly, then all at once. I was 26 when Seattle called. A design firm specializing in sustainable urban development was looking for someone to lead a project transforming neglected neighborhoods through green infrastructure. The position was risky, underfunded, and 3,000 miles from everything I knew. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. When I told my parents, my mother cried, not because she was proud, but because she was scared. My father barely looked up from his newspaper. "Seattle," he said flatly. "That's across the country." I know. What happens when this doesn't work out? I remember standing in their living room, suitcase already in my car, feeling the weight of his doubt settle over me like a heavy coat. Then I'll figure it out, I said quietly, just like I always do. He didn't say goodbye when I left. He just nodded once and went back to reading. The first year in Seattle was brutal. I lived in a studio apartment so small I could touch both walls with my arms spread wide. I worked 70-hour weeks, sketching designs until my hand cramped, pitching ideas to city councils who saw me as too young, too idealistic, too unproven. There were nights I sat on my fire escape, looking out at the skyline, wondering if my father had been right. Maybe I was wasting my time. Maybe I should have chosen something safer. But then I'd remember that garden in my backyard, the one nobody noticed, the one that bloomed anyway. And I kept going. The project that changed everything started in a forgotten corner of Seattle's Central District. An abandoned lot, overgrown with weeds, surrounded by low-income housing units where families lived in isolation, disconnected from each other and their environment. I saw something different. I saw potential. I designed a communal courtyard, green space woven into the urban fabric, benches arranged for conversation, raised garden beds for growing food, solar lighting to make it safe at night. It wasn't just landscaping. It was creating a heart for a neighborhood that had been overlooked for decades. The city approved the project with minimal funding. I supplemented with grants, donations, volunteer labor. For 2 years, I poured everything I had into that space, my time, my savings, my heart. And slowly, it came to life. Residents started gathering there. Elderly neighbors shared stories on the benches. Kids played in the green spaces. People who'd lived next door to each other for years finally learned each other's names. Then, last spring, I received an email that stopped me in my tracks. Subject line: National Urban Design Awards finalist. I read it 3 times before it felt real. 2 months later, I won. The award ceremony was in Denver. Designers and architects I'd admired for years shook my hand, congratulated me, asked about my process. My photo appeared in architectural journals. Local Seattle news ran a feature story. And back in Cleveland? Silence. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a like on the LinkedIn post announcing the win. Maybe they never saw it. Maybe they didn't know how to find it. Or maybe, and this was the thought that hurt most, maybe they saw it and it simply didn't matter to them. When the invitation came for Thanksgiving this year, I almost declined. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe a last thread of hope, said yes. The house looked exactly the same when I arrived. Same blue shutters, same wreath on the door, same familiar smell of roasted vegetables and cinnamon as I stepped inside. My sister was there with her husband and their 2 kids. My Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister, arrived just after me, pulling me into a long hug. "Oh, my dear Sofia," she called excitedly. "I'm so happy to see you." Her words were a small light in an otherwise dim room. Dinner proceeded as it always did. My father held court, steering every conversation. My sister's banking promotion was discussed in detail, the raise, the benefits, the stability. Her children's school achievements were celebrated. My mother beamed, passing dishes, refilling glasses. No one asked about Seattle. No one mentioned my award. It was as if the last 5 years of my life had simply not happened. Then came the toast. My father stood, glass raised, his expression proud and paternal. "To children who bring pride to their families," he began, pausing for effect, "and to others who are still trying to find their way." I felt my aunt's eyes on me, sharp and suddenly protective. My mother froze, her smile faltering. My sister was clapping. But I held my father's gaze. And I spoke. "Good thing I just won the National Urban Design Award in Seattle for my urban housing project. Don't worry, I've found my way, and the world has already noticed." The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples spread across the table. My father blinked, his expression shifting, surprise, confusion, something I couldn't quite name. My aunt set down her glass, a small smile playing at her lips. The silence stretched long and uncomfortable. No one knew how to respond. No one knew what to say. So I said nothing else. I simply returned to my meal, letting my words stand on their own. After dinner, I stepped outside into the November cold. The porch light flickered above me, casting uneven shadows across the driveway. I pulled my coat tighter and breathed in the sharp, familiar air of home, a place that had never quite felt like one. 5 years ago, I left this town trying to prove something. Tonight, I realized I don't have to prove anything at all. The next morning, I got into my car and drove away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror. The chatter, the tension, the careful politeness, all of it fading behind me with every mile. And somewhere between Cleveland and the highway, something inside me unlocked. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their pride. I'd built something real, something meaningful, without their permission.
And that was enough.
I got back to Seattle, resolved to turn my success into something that mattered, to people who needed it most. The perfect opportunity came at Christmas. December arrived with its soft gray skies and early darkness. The city transformed, lights strung across streets, wreaths on doorways, the scent of pine and cinnamon in the air. And I started planning something that mattered. Not a victory lap, not revenge, just something honest. A Christmas dinner, not in a restaurant or my apartment, but in the place that represented everything I'd built, the communal courtyard of my award-winning housing project. Seattle had blessed me and given me a sense of belonging. It was time to give something back to the city and the people who made it feel like home. And I knew exactly where to start. The communal courtyard, the place that gave me my first real breakthrough. I decided to host a community Christmas party there. I gathered a small team, and we began planning and decorating. Soon, the courtyard glowed with string lights and lanterns. Heaters hummed softly in the corners, and tables stretched in a long rectangle, dressed in simple white cloths. Potted evergreens lined the edges, while the surrounding apartment windows shimmered with warmth. I invited everyone who'd been part of my journey. My mentor from the design firm, colleagues who'd stayed late helping me finalize proposals, elderly neighbors from the housing community who'd watched the courtyard transform, interns I'd been mentoring, and most importantly, several homeless residents from the surrounding area, people I'd met through outreach programs, people who rarely received invitations to anything. I also sent invitations to my family, my parents, my sister, my aunt. I didn't expect them to come, but I offered the seat anyway. Christmas Day arrived cold and festive. By 6 o'clock, the courtyard was filled with people. Laughter echoed off the brick walls. A local musician played soft acoustic guitar. Plates were passed, food shared, stories exchanged. My aunt arrived first, her eyes bright with emotion as she took in the scene. "Sofia," she breathed, wrapping me in a hug as she always did. "This is so beautiful." "Aunt Carol, you came!" I screamed. "Of course I came." She pulled back, her hands on my shoulders. "Your parents should be here too." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Maybe next time." But as the evening unfolded, I realized I didn't need them there to feel whole. The table was full. The laughter was real. The connections genuine. One of the homeless residents, a man named Thomas, stood shakily and raised his cup. I just want to say, his voice cracked slightly, "I ain't been invited to something like this in I don't even know how long. Thank you. Thank you for making space." The courtyard went quiet. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone. And Thomas sat down, wiping his eyes, a smile breaking across his weathered face. I looked around at the faces glowing in the soft light. People from different worlds, different struggles, all gathered around the same table. My aunt caught my eye and nodded, pride and sorrow mixing in her expression. "For the first time," I said later, standing to thank everyone, "I don't feel like an outsider looking in. I feel home."
And I meant it.
Photos from the dinner were shared online, nothing big, just a small feature from a local community blog with the title, The Garden Table, Building Community One Dinner at a Time. It spread quietly through social media. People in Seattle shared it. Then friends of friends. Then someone back in Cleveland. My parents saw it through neighbors who gushed about how amazing her daughter's event looked. My aunt called them afterward, her voice gentle but firm. "You should see what your daughter's done," she told them. "It's not pride you should feel, it's gratitude." 2 days later, my father called. His voice wasn't angry. It was something I'd never heard before, disoriented, vulnerable, quietly uncertain. "We saw what you did," he said slowly. "Your mother keeps showing the pictures to everyone."
You really built that.
I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "Yes, Dad. I built it. For everyone who needed a seat, including the ones who never got one." Silence stretched across the line. Then my aunt's voice in the background, clear and unwavering. "You should be proud of her, Bob. She didn't just build a table. She built a life." New Year's Eve came quietly. I set a smaller table this time, just 6 chairs, arranged in my apartment with a view of the city lights reflecting off Puget Sound. I invited my family again. No expectations, just an open door. My aunt arrived first, carrying a pie and a bottle of wine. Then, just before 8, the doorbell rang. My parents stood in the hallway. My mother held a small wrapped box. My father's hands were in his pockets, his expression uncertain. "We wanted to come," my mother said quietly. "If that's still okay." I stepped aside, opening the door wider. "It's always been okay." They entered slowly, taking in the space, the warm light, the framed photos of my projects on the wall. My father's gaze lingered on the National Urban Design Award certificate, his jaw tightening slightly. My father sat down, not at the head of the table, because there wasn't one. We were equals side by side. The conversation was tentative at first. Polite questions, careful answers. But as the evening wore on, something softened. My mother asked about the housing project, really asked, and listened as I explained the vision behind it. My father was quiet, but his eyes stayed on me, present in a way they'd never been before. Just before midnight, I raised my glass. "To the roads that led us here," I said softly. "To finding our way, even when the path was unclear." My father lowered his gaze. His eyes glistened in the candlelight, pride and regret blending in the silence. My mother reached across the table, her hand finding mine. My aunt smiled, her expression saying what words couldn't. Finally, the room stayed quiet for just a heartbeat. Then soft clinking filled the air as glasses touched, gentle and real. Outside, fireworks began, distant bursts of color painting the night sky. But inside, the glow came from something quieter, something earned. The following night, after everyone had gone home, I stepped onto my balcony. Snow drifted through the darkness, soft and silent. The city stretched before me, lights twinkling like a constellation of small hopes. I tilted my head back, letting the cold air fill my lungs, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I used to think belonging meant being invited. But sometimes it means building your own place and keeping the door open. Not for approval, not for validation, but because you finally understand that the table you build with your own hands will always be the one where you truly belong. I didn't need my father's toast to define me. I didn't need their recognition to know my worth. I just needed to remember what I'd known since I was 7 years old, digging in the dirt, planting seeds no one else could see. That beauty doesn't need permission to grow. It just needs space, patience, and belief. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is realizing you were never trying to find your way. You were creating it all along. And to anyone watching who has been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated by the people who are supposed to believe in you, your worth isn't defined by their recognition. Stand tall, follow your passions, and use your gifts to create the life you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, click the subscribe button and join me for more stories of resilience and triumph.